didn't flatter me by reading the blog that I wrote on this arduous process of acquiring MySQL. It's been a factor in my conversation with Marten Mickos for 5 years. And the joke that I outlined on my blog was that I would have dinner with him once or twice a year. He's a very charismatic, very interesting guy, and we'd sit down and talk about markets and changes and things that were going on. And I'd always end the conversation by saying, geez, Martin, you're building a great company and we see the world so similarly. What would you think about becoming a part of Sun? And he would immediately turn the conversation back to talking about his childhood in Finland or something. And every year we'd go through this ritual. We'd have a nice dinner, it'd be very interesting, and I'd pop the question, I'd say, hey, what do you think about joining Sun? And he'd say, let me tell you about where I grew up. And so over a number of years, I just got used to being rejected. And this year he did it again. He said, sorry, we're thinking about going public. And then the next morning he called back and said, we might be a little more interested. And they definitely they weren't on their road to go public, but they also see there's some downsides to being a public company, which Mike and I can both share with you in exhaustive detail. It's not without risk to go down that path. You might find yourself in the uncomfortable position of having a much larger competitor come tell your board that you're going to join their company. That seems to be an experience that a few companies are having right now. And I also think what he cared most about was the success of MySQL and not his financial success. That was not his, in no discussion have I ever had with anybody at MySQL where they viewed financial success as their measure of success. The measure of success for MySQL was how prolific it was in changing the landscape of the internet. And so they knew that joining Sun, they could be much more effective in changing the landscape of the internet. And that's why the marriage made sense. And oh, by the way, the economics had to make sense as well. But that was a far faster conversation than how could we put our teams together? What would we do differently? Could you help us build global sales and service? Could you help us reach another 11 million deployments? Could we marry together with what you're doing with Lustre and ZFS and Glassfish to go create a new wave of innovation? That's where we ended up spending our time. Once we got to agreement on how that would work, the rest of it was, just putting a signature on a document.